Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Ahmed and I'm an AI researcher at Cambridge University. Today I'm going to talk about something that you probably wouldn't expect from someone wearing this yellow jumper: fashion. Fashion is all around us. It's an integral part of our culture, yet it's going through a crisis right now. In fact, since the beginning of COVID-19, more than $3.5 billion worth of fashion orders have been canceled. Retailers are struggling financially. In fact, groups like Arcadia Group, Debenhams, and many others are filing for bankruptcy. This has had a knock-on effect on the manufacturing industry. For example, more than 2,000 factories around the world have closed, affecting more than 4 million workers. The fashion industry is going through an enormous crisis. Yet, the world demands more of it. The world needs sustainable fashion. The world needs ethical fashion. But all these things require money. Today in this video, I'm going to talk about three things. 1. What is the challenge with achieving sustainable fashion? 2. What is the uncertainty dilemma? And 3. What role does AI and machine learning play in all of this? It's no question that the fashion industry needs to move towards more sustainable practices, but it's one of the many issues plaguing the industry currently. The other issues including slow adoption of technology, as well as things like lack of transparency in the supply chain. However, we can't possibly cover all of these issues in just one video. Instead, we're going to cover one issue, an issue that I think is incredibly important in tackling the sustainability problem in fashion: the issue of overproduction of inventory. More than 85% of all garments end up in landfills. The cost of unsold inventory is fashion's biggest inefficiency. In fact, back in 2018, Burberry burned close to $37 million worth of merchandise, but they're not alone in doing this. Between 2013 and 2018, H&M burned close to 60 tons of unsold inventory. Brands do this because they've made a mistake. They've overproduced, and now they can either discount their clothes and reduce their brand value, or burn them? I don't know if you guys remember this brand called Pierre Cardin. If you don't, that's okay. All you need to know is that it was this prestigious luxury brand that now is sold in Sports Direct. And there are many reasons for why their brand lost credibility, but one of the main reasons was that it was widely available. Just a side note, my junior prom suit was bought from Pierre Cardin. I just couldn't say no to that all year round 75% discount. Okay, back to the inventory problem. Clearly, too much inventory and overproduction is bad for the brand, and it's bad for the environment. So one of the most common perspectives that you'll see by sustainability advocates is to make customers buy less, and that by making customers buy less, you'll somehow be able to reduce the amount that companies produce. While there's some truth and logic to that statement, I personally don't think that that's the right approach. The necessary behavioral change that would be needed to get that to happen is just not going to happen at the rate that we want it to. So getting customers to buy less is a behavioral change that will take quite a few years, and we just don't have that much time. I also think that many people haven't considered what kind of economic effects it would have on the poor nations of the world, which are largely responsible for manufacturing our garments. At the same time, we can't just ignore this excess inventory problem. It's real, and it's important that we understand why it exists. That leads me to my second point, the uncertainty dilemma. Okay, just to note, what I'm about to discuss now is not necessarily a mainstream opinion. It's rather the opinion of myself and some others like John Thorbeck from Change Capital and Gonzalo Cruz from Platform E and a few others who support this kind of perspective. But hear me out. Now, in my opinion, the reason that the fashion industry has this whole inventory problem is because of the uncertainty dilemma. The uncertainty dilemma is the reason why fashion companies are overproducing and why they're struggling financially as well. Okay, just as an example, did you know that many retailers start with a 60 to 70% margin when the product is first produced, but by the time they sell it, they end up with a 1 to 2% margin. Now, something is happening there, and I want to break that down. What's happening there is the effects of uncertainty. Okay, broadly speaking, uncertainty is an issue that exists in all industries. So just for example, let's say you're getting a car insurance. The more uncertain the insurance company is about whether you'll claim or whether you'll get an accident or whether your car will get stolen, the higher your premium. It's how they mitigate the risk. Another example of uncertainty is what happened with the pound when Brexit happened. Now, when Brexit was announced, nothing actually happened at that exact moment, but the pound value dipped. And as a result, there was a lot of uncertainty about what the future of UK looked like. That made the pound a very unattractive currency to hold. Now, what does this uncertainty mean in the context of fashion? Now, if we want to understand how the uncertainty affects the fashion industry, we have to understand how the fashion industry works. Now, in the most simplest way, a fashion company will operate as follows. The designer will design some products, and the merchandiser will then select the products and figure out how much of these products to order. Most fashion brands outsource their production, but there are companies like Zara who own many of their factories. Anyway, when the merchandiser merchandiser selects the product, they also have to select how much they want to order. So they have to forecast how many they think customers will buy. This is where the problem starts. Merchandising teams are ordering products that they're going to sell in 6 to 8 months. So trying to predict what's going to be trendy or cool in 6 to 8 months is an incredibly difficult problem, if not an impossible problem to solve. And this problem has gotten even harder in the social media age where people's preferences are changing all the time. We have a new smartphone every 6 months, but the fashion supply chain hasn't adapted to this new customer dynamic. This whole scenario where the merchandising teams don't know what's going to sell in the future is the uncertainty dilemma. So how do fashion companies then deal with this uncertainty dilemma? Well, they produce the goods at the lowest cost possible. They do this because that way they can discount the products heavily, and that creates an artificial demand that sells the product. Now, if the cost of the good is so low to begin with, even if they discount heavily, they'll still have a lot of margin to play with. In fact, if you take a peek at how merchandising teams decide how to put something on sale, you'll notice that the only metric they really care about is sell-through, because they know that the product's been produced at such a low price. Doesn't matter how much they discount it, they still can sell it at a profit. Now, for many years that worked, but recently the cost of global manufacturing has gone up. Typically, what would happen in the past is that when one country's manufacturing costs went up, they would move to another, and then they would move to another. And that's what constantly happened in the industry. But now, global costs have gone up everywhere, and they can no longer use this lowest cost production as a way of mitigating the uncertainty dilemma. For many years, this whole technique of lowest cost production worked. If you read the book Shoe Dog, you'll know that Nike pioneered this methodology by manufacturing shoes in Japan and importing them to the United States to compete against Adidas, which was higher cost. And for many years, this technique worked. But now, because the cost of global manufacturing has gone up, it's no longer something that people can do. So what are the consequences? Well, simply that means that the fashion industry can't get their goods as cheap as they used to. And that means their whole strategy of heavy discounting is no longer working. But the thing is, they haven't changed their processes. Most American companies still discount 65 to 85%. And now with sustainability requirements for manufacturing, that increases the manufacturing cost even further. This is mostly due to the additional costs that factories have to incur in order to certify themselves as sustainable. Not only that, if you're sourcing organic cotton versus genetically modified cotton, you have to change your pest control strategies, which is also more expensive. All in all, manufacturing costs are going up a lot, and the fashion industry's processes haven't changed. They're still relying on discounting as a way to mitigate the uncertainty dilemma. Well, if you recall the Boohoo.com scandal earlier this year, they were caught with not paying factory workers in Leicester enough money. They had violated the minimum wage requirement, and that's largely due to the fact that they needed to keep the cost down low. While Boohoo.com might not have been directly responsible for paying the factory workers below minimum wage, they were indirectly responsible because they were pressuring suppliers to keep their costs low. I can tell you from personal experience, because my family background's in textiles, that retailers do pressure suppliers to keep their costs low. Now, the way that suppliers meet those demands is by cutting corners, whether it's paying their workers below minimum wage, whether it's violating environmental regulations, or not following sustainability practices. Overall, it's a mess. It's bad for the suppliers because they're being pressured to reduce their cost. It's bad for the fashion companies because they're not making a profit. It's bad for the customers because they're not really getting what they need. And it's bad for the environment because we're violating all these sustainability regulations and overproducing and burning clothes. So what's the solution? Well, firstly, fashion companies need to move away from this lowest cost production culture. They need to find a new way to manage uncertainty. One way to manage uncertainty is to reduce uncertainty to begin with. And what does that really mean, and how can we do that? Well, one way to do that is to listen to what the Greek philosopher Anaximenes said: in the presence of uncertainty, delay judgment. So let's think about what we're uncertain about. Well, the uncertainty dilemma is that the fashion industry doesn't know what people are going to buy in 8 months' time. That's an incredibly hard problem. The way that they're dealing with it is by reducing their cost. That cost then ensures they can discount, create artificial demand, and sell their product. Now, how do they address that problem? Well, one way to address it is to do what Anaximenes said and delay judgment. Instead of ordering for clothes in August in January, which is 8 months, maybe we should order clothes in July, which is only 1 month. And that's where the innovation should be focused on, increasing the speed and flexibility of the supply chain to enable you to order 1 month in advance. Let me give you an example. One of my colleagues who works in fashion informed me that Google offered Gap live analytics about what people were searching. This information would then allow them to then inform their production. However, because their production lead times were like 6 to 8 months in the future, the live analytics happening in real time were completely useless for them. Now, the next question is, how do you create speed and flexibility in the supply chain? Unfortunately, in just one video, I won't be able to cover all the specifics of speed and flexibility in the supply chain. However, I will say that there's a great study done by Warren Hausman and John Thorbeck at Stanford that says by improving speed and flexibility, you can have 22 to 28% increase in profitability. Not to even mention the amount of value value that you're going to bring to sustainability. Now let's unpack that a bit, because the benefits just aren't financial. By increasing speed and flexibility, you're giving customers what they want, because no longer are you trying to predict 8 months in advance. The probability that a customer is going to change their preferences in 3 to 4 weeks is far less likely than if you were to compare it with 6 to 8 months. So what that means is that you don't need to discount as much, so you actually make a greater profit, which explains the 22 to 28% increase. Now, what is the value to the factory? Well, the factories no longer need to be pressured to reducing their cost, because that's no longer the way that you're mitigating your uncertainty. Previously, suppliers were measured by how low they could keep their costs, and they did that by any means necessary, whether it was cutting corners and violating workers' rights. Now, if you are to implement speed and flexibility, their incentives are different. They need to be fast, they need to be agile, and that's exactly what the industry needs. As I mentioned previously, it's relatively easier to predict what's going to happen in 3 to 4 weeks compared to predicting what's going to happen in 6 to 8 months. What that means is that your forecast is much more accurate. A more accurate forecast means more accurate production and less chances of overproduction, which, going back to the beginning, was the overall problem here. So by creating speed and flexibility, you're much less likely to overproduce, which is better for the environment because you don't need to burn, which is better for your profit because you don't need to discount, which is better for the suppliers because you don't need to pressure them to break the rules, and better for sustainability all around, and better for the industry. Now you're probably wondering, where is the machine learning and AI component here? One thing you noticed, I didn't mention using AI to predict the future, because the reality is it's really hard, if not impossible, even with machine learning, to predict what's going to happen in the future. Instead, I think we should use machine learning to model the uncertainty. Specifically, that means looking at your forecast and figuring out which one of these products am I highly uncertain about. And machine learning can use historical data to then give you a measure of how uncertain your forecast is. Now, using that uncertainty, you can change your strategy. So if you're highly uncertain about a particular product, let's say this yellow jumper, then don't make as many items. One of the other areas where we can use AI is in the supply chain. I'm under no illusion that reducing a 6 to 8 month lead time supply chain to 3 to 4 weeks is an easy task. But I do think that AI can be used as a decision support system to facilitate that process. The fashion supply chain is incredibly complicated. Factories have a lot of requirements and dependencies, and it's very difficult for a human to process all these dependencies and spit out a reasonable answer. So I think that AI can be incredibly valuable in helping deal with these dependencies and giving reliable and good recommendations to merchandising teams on how to manage their supply chain. Ultimately, for the sake of profitability, for the sake of sustainability in the environment, and for the sake of humanity, we need to move away from the lowest cost production process. My recommendation is that we move towards speed and flexibility and use AI and machine learning to support that process. Thanks for watching this video and making it this far. I really do believe this is a topic that needs to be discussed. And if you thought that my explanation was helpful, please give me a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. If you have any other questions, leave them down in the comments below. Until next time.